Jen. Hi.
Hello.
So just for the record, what is your name?
My name is Wei.
Nice to meet you, Wei.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for helping me with this project. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Feel free to answer as in depth as you want or as shallow as you want. And if at any point I say anything that is make you uncomfortable, don't hesitate to point it out, okay?
Okay.
All right, great. So, question number one, what racial or ethnic groups describes you?
I am Chinese American. I was born in China and I immigrated to the US when I was about 4 years old and now live in California.
Amazing. So, what do you consider yourself to be?
I consider myself to be Chinese American, although I originally started off as a Chinese citizen because I was born in China.
And how long have you been in the US?
Ooh, since I was 4, so a very, very, very long time. Over 30 years. Although I did move back to China when I was 9 for a year, and then I have visited China off and on for a consecutive few months in the summer, visiting family during like summer break and whatnot. So yeah.
And so you said you moved back to China for a year. Why did you do it?
I moved back to China when I was 9 because my mom and dad were very working class. So they had me and my younger brother, and in order to sort of focus on working rather than childcare, which to be honest, they couldn't afford at the time, being working class, they sent me and my brother to China to live with my family. That way, we can not only sort of get more immersion in our culture and also like build more of a relationship with our family in China, but also enable them to actually build wealth and kind of like build a better life for us in the US. Most of my family is in China. Only my immediate family is in the US, so that's why it's very difficult in terms of like having any sort of community or family community in the US.
Interesting. And so, can you tell me a little bit about your family dynamics?
Yeah, my family dynamics. Both my parents worked. I have a younger brother. We grew up sort of like very working class, very much like chasing the American dream situation. Um, the dynamic is, I would say, probably not as conventional, just because um, we're my parents, because they spent so much of their life, their foundational life, in China. They do hold some more conventional Chinese like views and like more traditional views, whereas like my brother and I, we are mostly Americanized. So there is kind of that clash sometimes between cultures, even though, I think it definitely helped when my brother and I lived in China so that we can better understand where the traditions are coming from. But that's usually how the dynamics are.
Gotcha.
Yeah, a mix of traditional and then traditional Chinese and then American.
And so, what are some cherished family traditions you grew up with?
Yeah, one of the things that I really loved was when I was living in China when I was 9, and every weekend we would go over to my maternal grandma's house, and it was just super rambunctious and an extreme contrast to the sort of more solitude life in the US, because all our family was there, and I had, my mom was one of 6 siblings, and same with my dad's side too, so it was quite a large family. So every weekend we would go over to my grandma's and have large meals together, and then also like the adults would go play mahjong while the kids like go off in a bedroom and play card games and stuff. So that was a tradition I really liked because it was a uh, it was unique in the sense that like not only was the meal sort of like more traditional, rather than like in the US you sort of just have your own dish, your own dinner etc. We had like a large sort of like spread of things to eat, and it was just more community based. So yeah.
Can you tell me more about a traditional meal from your country?
Yeah. So basically, each meal, well, typically lunch and dinner comprises of fang, which is rice, and then cai, which is the side dishes. Thai literally translates into, I think, vegetable, even though those dishes may contain meat as well. So it's not just vegetarian dishes. So one of the biggest differences between Chinese cuisine and American cuisine is each individual, and I think this is indicative of sort of like the communism thing versus like the individualistic American point of view, is that in China, everyone has their own bowl of rice. However, everyone shares all the dishes. So it's actually an extreme faux pas, and there's so many memes about this when foreigners, when they come to China or even go to a Chinese restaurant in the United States, if they just order one individual thing and just only eat that one dish, it's considered sort of like, who does that? Because you're supposed to share a bunch of dishes, and then the sort of like not blandness, but like the more sort of like neutralness of the rice, the steamed rice, is supposed to, each bite is supposed to be complemented by the Thai. That way it's like, you know, offsetting the saltiness or, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah.
And since we're on the topic of food, is there any misconception about your country's food that you would like to clear up?
Yeah, definitely. The conception that we just eat like dogs and cats, that's, you know, pretty racist. I think that maybe that's founded in earlier times in history where maybe it's tied to like, you know, great poverty during the Great Leap Forward, where there was extreme starvation throughout the country. Like, I don't know, but either way, it's pretty racist. We don't eat cats and dogs. It like is not a commonplace thing that people do. You can't just like go into a restaurant and order a dog or something. So racist and untrue.
And so, can you tell me about a time that you encounter racism or discrimination personally?
Yeah, a lot. So I think like even as young as elementary school. So in fifth grade, I moved to a more sort of like a less diverse city. I remember in fifth grade during recess, one of the kids said, "Hey, you and David would make a really good couple." And I sort of just was like, based on what? It's because we're the only two Asians in the school? Like, so I think that's an example of maybe not necessarily overt racism, but microaggressions where I kind of feel like, okay, I don't know about this. Like, what criteria are you basing this on? More overt racism, I would say, like, in high school, I was just crossing the street at a crosswalk, and some people drove by and they rolled down their windows in a truck and screamed a racial slur at me. And it wasn't even the correct racial slur, not that that matters, but I mean, that kind of paints a picture where it's like, if you're gonna insult me, like it's extra insulting and racist, because not only are you saying the racial slur, but you're assuming that all Asians are the same from the same country. So that's another instance. Other like non-direct, like face-to-face instances are, I used to use dating apps, and I would get a lot of racist messages. So I would get messages that say like, oh, I heard that Asian women are mean, or like they're like really demanding. Like, care to elaborate on that? And I'm just like, okay, you're just, first of all, I never matched with you, and you decided that that was your opener to kind of like pinpoint on one aspect of my identity and make a broad brush about like what Asian women are. So I mean, I think racism, it happens in so many different forms: microaggressions, direct aggressions in person, and then also just online racism.
Oh, that's pretty heavy. Sorry you had to go through this. Is there pieces of historical knowledge from your culture that you think are important for others to know?
I think it would be I think it's important to understand. I'm like, that the people are not the government.
Okay.
I'm trying not to get banned by the Chinese government if somehow they get hold of this.
Got it.
Because I feel like there is this like portrayal of Chinese people as like really sort of like I don't know, anti-American and like anti-business and like anti like, you know, and I think so much of that is one, propaganda from media, and then two, like it's the government that's not reflective of the people. So I feel like one of the important things for people to understand is like, how did the Chinese government come to be, and like what happened during the communist revolution, and what happened during like the Great Leap Forward and stuff. Like I don't think that Chinese citizens were happy about starving, you know, but like that was part of the culture. And also, you know, during the Cultural Revolution, they imprisoned scholars, like professors, teachers, like, you know, all that stuff. I don't think that's necessarily indicative of the people. Yeah, so I would say an important thing to know is the history, and the government isn't representative of the people necessarily, because it's not a democracy. You don't vote for your leader. It's like, yeah.
Since we're on the topic of institution, how do the education system differ between your home country and here?
Oh, it was very intense. So granted, this is only based on me being 9 years old and doing 3rd grade, I think, there. But it was very difficult. They put a lot of stress on you early on, and to some degree I kind of understand, because with a population size that large, I can understand how upwards mobility is really, really important and like stressed in education, because it is competitive when you have such a large population kind of striving for the best spots at schools or universities or jobs and stuff. So the education system there, basically, we even in elementary school, we basically like had a homeroom. We didn't really like rotate to different classrooms and stuff. Like the teachers would rotate in and out, and I would say one of the things that is different, you go home in the middle of the day to take a nap. That's part of both like school and also everybody, basically, like adults, working people, like they take a break during lunchtime to go home, eat with their family, and then they nap. So yeah, I think that the math is definitely more advanced. I came back and I was like, oh, I already know division, and you guys are, you know, still trying to catch up. So it's definitely very intense. Yeah, and I think that maybe more attention should probably be put on mental health because you hear about a lot of suicides during exam times, both not just in China but like other Asian countries too. It's a very commonplace to have that. So yeah.
In what ways have you maintained some family traditions since moving here?
Oh, so even for Thanksgiving or Christmas, like we, instead of having a turkey, instead of having the traditional sort of like, we celebrate the American holiday. However, we do it with Chinese dishes, or like, so basically we have hot pot. We bring out like this giant bubbling broth filled like cauldron almost. It doesn't look like cauldron, it looks like a wok basically. And again, it's very communal. You kind of share everything. And yeah, you basically put whatever you're cooking that you plan to eat in there, and then like it boils with, it cooks with all the sort of broth and the juices and stuff. And then yeah, so what, that's one of the traditions that I really like is, you know, we're kind of mixing the American traditions in with the Chinese traditions. When I was younger, I really liked Lunar New Year because as a kid, you're like, I'm rich now because you, as a kid, you get tons of red packets that contain money, cash. So every year during Lunar New Year, I was like, yes, give me the red packets, crisp $100 bills, like love it. Another thing I really loved is I forget what it's called, but there's like this program every year for Lunar New Year that has tons of like dancing skits or whatever. So my family and I would always like watch that live, and it was a tradition that I really liked.
And well, since we're talking about television, how do you feel about the Asian representation in the media?
It's changed a lot throughout the years. I feel like right now it's having it's having its moment. I hope the moment doesn't go away. But I remember when I was a kid, I was basically starved for any Asian representation in media. Like, I mean, Power Rangers guilty of this other than just the Yellow Ranger, because the Black Ranger too, they made although I was happy that there was an Asian Power Ranger, I'm like, you made the Asian Power Ranger yellow. Same with the Black Power Ranger. So, so I do love that obviously there's more representation now and less starved for representation. And not only just representation, but like on our own terms, right? Like rather than having Asian Americans depicted as like a caricature, like it's being told as the Asian American specifically, rather than like something that's like, oh, that's a Chinese person, or like very like breakfast at Tiffany's, where it's like, you know, a white dude playing a racist version of an Asian character. Although I will say that there are nuances in media portrayals, because for instance, I love K-pop. I love like K-dramas, all that stuff, but I do notice that there is more sort of like American affinity towards Korean media rather than Chinese media. And I think that some of that is very much rooted in sort of political ties and history. You know, like China is often demonized for being like, oh, this power hungry country, and like, you know, I find that like yeah, I do think it's a little bit weird when there is an extreme fetishization of like, say, Japanese culture. Like Japanese culture went through the same thing that Korean media representation went through too, where everything was like, oh my gosh, anime, oh my gosh, Nintendo, like, you know, so having that sort of like tiered racism in media, or not racism, but like disproportionate obsession or representation is definitely still there.
Gotcha. And finally, I'm gonna leave you with this one. What does it mean for you to be Asian American?
Oh, I think like it means to be stuck between two cultures. And I don't mean stuck necessarily in a bad way, although sometimes it is a bad way. But yeah, I think being Asian American is understanding where your heritage comes from, the cultural traditions, like having I don't know, being proud of certain parts of your identity, and also advocating for parts of the culture that should change. For instance, like I don't think like Asian Americans or Asians in general like talk about mental health enough. like it's definitely a very taboo subject. Like you only talk about it in the sense that like, oh, there's something wrong with somebody. And I don't think that's a really great way to go about it, especially since like historically there, and especially in immigrants, there's a lot of PTSD. So just because you don't talk about it doesn't mean that it's not there. So I think being Asian American is, you know, not forgetting your identity and speaking up on ways that you can improve um, uh, improve basically like taboo subjects like within each culture, and then just kind of introduce and educate, I think, because I feel like as an Asian American or anybody that's stuck between two cultures, like it's a unique opportunity to see both sides and then improve both sides too. So that's what I think.
Amazing. Well, Wei, thank you so much for your time. That was super informative. Is there